At the end of March, I started a new series entitled Ask Perligo, in which I go through and respond to various comments or questions which have been posed over the past month, which I either didn't have time to respond to, or which warranted a longer response than the comment section on YouTube gives room for. This month, I am continuing that series, albeit a bit delayed. We are now well into May, and looking back at the month of April, but continuing nonetheless. I also, at the end of the last video, asked for your suggestions on what we should title this series. Currently, it is still called Ask Perligo, but one person did suggest calling it Perligo Ponders, which is not a bad title. If you have any other suggestions, feel free to let me know, and if we get enough in, I'll be happy to put it to a public vote, and then we can determine what to call the series moving forward. But in the meantime, we have some comments to look at, some potential alternate theories and interpretations to consider. So let's get into it. I made a video looking at and considering and theorizing about where the power of the bishops of Dima actually comes from. Where do they derive their authority? We do get some information in the I'm Clancy video, but obviously that doesn't give us everything we need to fully understand how these bishops operate and how their authority and power, particularly when it comes to the religion of vialism, really works. And we can't have all the answers, but it is worthwhile to theorize and consider what the possible explanations may be. So I propose something similar to where Blurryface, or Nico, the lead bishop, gets its power, namely from Tyler giving him that power, creating Blurryface in order that he might be a representation of his insecurities, and Blurryface gaining power as a result of that. And that therefore the other bishops, the other 8 of the 9, also gained their powers in a similar fashion. And so Gara Bendita commented in response to that, interesting to imagine where Keons comes into the mix in the process of Clancy's anthropomorphisms, for lack of a better word, of his doubts and insecurities. While Keons is no less powerful than the other 8 bishops, he clearly has a unique way of exhibiting that power compared to the others. For instance, he is often referred to as the kindest of all the other bishops, or the most compassionate, and obviously he is the one who turns against Nico and betrays him in order to help Clancy escape. Was he created to add contrast or balance somehow, or perhaps a glimmer of hope? This is an interesting idea. It's one which I found myself considering also after that video came out, and I was looking back at what I'd written and proposed and thinking about it a bit more. Clearly, the way I see it is that we have the 9 bishops, and they all represent various insecurities, and they're all projections which Tyler or Clancy created in order to wrestle with those insecurities one by one, rather than trying to tackle them all at once. And therefore, they are all antagonists to Clancy. But then suddenly, we get this one, Keons, who turns and is now a friend to Clancy. So how does that happen? Where did that change come from? And why is one of the bishops so friendly to him while the others are antagonists, if really the purpose they were all created for is to be his antagonist in a certain sense, right? They're all things he's struggling with. My interpretation is not necessarily that he was intentionally created to be a contrast or a balance to the others, although that is a fair idea, and perhaps that is what Tyler did do. However, what I think is more likely is that he is one of the bishops Clancy or Tyler defeated. We know that Keons was Clancy's own bishop. When Clancy was living in Dima, he was in the village which was ruled over by Keons. So he is the one he was most familiar with. Keons is also the one who brings him back after he escapes into the vast wilderness of Trench, because it is his bishop, and he's the one who has authority over Clancy. So it would also make sense that the bishop which Clancy is the closest to is also the one which he could have the most possible influence over and have the best chance of defeating, because by being close to him, he has a chance to get to know him, to better understand how to defeat and overthrow him. Again, that is the purpose of creating these bishops, these projections of Tyler's insecurities, is that he may give them a face at the table and a face and a name, and by doing so, better understand them, and by better understanding them, have a better chance of defeating them. So the one which he got to know the best was the one which he was the closest to in the city of Dima. Keons. And so by doing that, he actually overcame and defeated Keons, and Keons therefore came over to his side. So that's my theory, that's my interpretation of what's going on with Keons. But perhaps there's something I missed there. Perhaps there's a part or an element of Keons which betrays that even before Clancy could have possibly overthrown him, he already would have been more sympathetic to Clancy. And that may be so. And if you believe that that is the case, let me know. I'd be happy to hear more theories on this, especially the original commenter. All right, moving on to the next comment. This one is also in response to that same video. AbbyVice7756 writes, additionally, we see a bit of this in the Bandito lyric. I created this world to feel some control, destroy it if I want. Maybe the reason Clancy keeps going in circles is because he doesn't want to destroy it, for fear of losing his feeling of control. His biggest insecurity is not having control. Maybe Blurryface or Nico is the fear of having no control, and Clancy can't let go of that, so he allows himself to be controlled by Blurryface. This way, he can feel like he's in control, which would also align with seizing. I know it's circular, but hopefully it's understandable, and maybe that's the whole point of this lore. This is a very good point, and one which I think does make a good deal of sense, especially tying it into this idea of seizing. But yes, fundamentally what we see at the core of this story is a battle for control over Dima and its citizens. The whole idea of the song Nico and the Niners is that Dima don't control us, but that is exactly what they are seeking to do. And yet also, as this commenter mentioned, in the song Bandito, Tyler references that he created the world in order to feel control. It is this which ties him so closely to the bishops, which makes him so similar to them. They both seek control. And that is why if he becomes a bishop, he must do better, because he also has this impulse towards control. And control, if misused or abused, obviously can lead to great evil. And so it is likely no mistake that the symbol of the religion of vialism, which is its greatest power, is this power of seizing control over another life, quite literally and violently. The whole system of vialism is built around not just controlling the minds of your citizens, but controlling their lives in such a fundamental sense that even after they are dead, you can still tell them what to do. So perhaps what we will see at the end of the story is Clancy coming into control over the city. And then the question will be, and the decision in front of him will be, how will he use this power of control? In fact, that question already has kind of reared its head. He has been given the power of seizing on the island of Voltsoy, as we saw in the video for the outside. He already has, in a great sense, a power to control others, and he must use that for good. And so far it seems that he has, to the best of his ability, used the tools of his enemy against them for good. But of course, that is the fundamental moral question, which is about to be posed if Clancy does defeat Nico in the tower. He must do better, which means, in a sense, relinquishing the control, or at least relinquishing his desire for control. And perhaps that is what it means to defeat Blurryface. Blurryface is a symbol of control, a visceral, physical symbol of control, as the black paint seeps over Tyler's entire body, controlled by Blurryface. And so Tyler must defeat that impulse in him in order to be a just leader of Dima. But let me know what you think. Moving on from that to something of a more lighthearted comment. This one from Sleepy Forever, 7, comes in response to a video which I did exploring who Josh or the Torchbearer is throughout this story. Is he a projection of Tyler's mind? Is he there throughout? Obviously, many of these questions were raised after the end of the video for Navigating, when we saw that he wasn't really present with Tyler in a fully physical sense throughout much of the Scaled and Icy era, if not all of it. So one theory I proposed, or one possible explanation which I gave for that, was that the bishops had created a clone of Josh Dunn and had somehow seized him and were using him to follow and keep an eye on Tyler. And so Sleepy Forever mentions that this explanation would imply that the bishops knew how to play the drums, which is something of a humorous thought. It's not impossible that they did, I suppose, but it is an interesting point. Which raises a broader question about this power of seizing, which is if the bishops are going to seize different figures and use them for their own ends, and potentially even, although I will admit we haven't seen that many actual examples of this, but potentially use them to manipulate others by posing as a living being. I think the best example we can point to of this is during the Scaled and Icy livestream experience. We saw two bishops posing as the hosts of a talk show, which implies that the bishops know how to host a talk show. Arguably an easier job than drumming at the level which Josh Dunn does, but obviously there is this sort of lighthearted implication that the bishops have a bunch of random skill sets that they can use when they seize people, which they need to be able to use when they seize people in order to get the most out of seizing those people and using them for their nefarious ends. In one of my most recent videos, I went through and explored the possible different timelines inside the world of Trench and Dima in order to attempt to better understand how time works in comparison to our own world. I dare say I did not fully reach a conclusive answer, although there is a theory which I found to be the most compelling. But as part of that, I was looking at the two figures which we see at the end of Nico and the Niners, and who then reappear at the end of The Outside, these two children who have grown up and become banditos themselves. And so Hanaria, Q8X, commented in response to that, we also see both of them as zombies during Paladin Strait, meaning at some point they joined the Glorious Gone. Now, my response to this is yes and no. I understand that the popular theory is that we were able to spot and identify two zombies in that horde of the undead which arises during the battle of Paladin Strait. We were able to identify two of them as those two figures, but now dead. However, I'm not convinced that that's actually what we saw. I think they looked quite similar, but I think that was purely a coincidence. I'm not convinced of the identity of those figures in Paladin Strait. I think we saw very clearly and very plainly the connection between Nico and the Niners and The Outside, but I'm not sure that those two figures, who are depicted as banditos, which implies they escaped Dima, in fact, they're standing as banditos holding torches outside as the city of Dima burns. I'm not convinced that those were then recaptured and became Glorious Gone and vessels. Now, they may have. I can't say with any certainty that they didn't, but I wasn't as persuaded by the visual connection there in Paladin Strait. But leaving that aside for a moment, let's grant that they are right. This is true, and that is what happened. Those figures are the same. We see them again as zombies in Paladin Strait. Then yes, this would have implications for the timeline and would seem to further solidify that a good number of years passed between the end of The Outside and the Battle of Paladin Strait. But where did that time go? Certainly, it seems necessary that that time did go somewhere, because Dima appears to be completely rebuilt after suffering what looked to be a devastating fire at the end of The Outside. So that would give them plenty of time to be recaptured, brought back into Dima, reincorporated into the system, offered up at the Assembly of the Glorious Gone, and turned into vessels for the bishops to use for their own ends. Regardless, whether or not I'm right, or the popular consensus is, or what I perceive to be the popular consensus, is correct on this matter, it's still a very interesting point to consider, and reminds us once again that we have such a very limited understanding of how time and many other functions really work inside this world of Trench and Dima. With that being said, thank you so much for joining me as I go through some of these comments from the past month. If you would like your comment to be featured next month, then feel free to comment something interesting, something you found compelling, or a question you had unanswered, or a point which you disagreed with me on in one of my theories, or so on. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Perligo Ponders is a very strong contender as a series name for these monthly recaps. But if you have any other suggestions, do let me know, because I'd love to be able to put this to a vote, have a nice little one-day long poll competition to determine this and let the people decide definitively what we should call this series moving forward. As always, if you have any other comments, questions, or suggestions, leave them below, and don't forget to subscribe for more music, commentary, and reviews.